panel discussion. My name is Damien Bell, and I'll be the moderator for today. We are excited to have you join us for what promises to be an enriching conversation. The term Sankofa, rooted in the Akan culture of Ghana, encourages learning from the past to inform the future, reaching back to move forward and lifting as we climb. The symbol, the mystical bird, with its feet firmly planted forward, while its head effortlessly turned backwards to reach for an egg, a symbol of the future. Today, we have gathered a distinguished group of speakers who will reflect on history, share valued insights, and explore how we can use the lessons of the past to shape a brighter future. I would like to do a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the Sahn-koh-fah Nation and their peoples, in whose traditional, ancestral, unceded territory UBC Okanagan is situated in. How I live, work, and play on this land has been shaped by Sankofa. My ability to look back at the history of my Jamaican ancestors on this land has truly informed my relationship with Indigenous people and their land today. And as I do a land acknowledgement, I would also like to do an African ancestral acknowledgement of my people. We acknowledge the Indigenous Africans who were forcefully removed from their native lands and dispersed across the New World. This involuntary migration heavily contributed to the movement of African-descended people across the African diaspora to places like Canada. As students and learners, we deemed it highly necessary to think deeper and examine the processes that led to this disposition of Indigenous people on this land and settler colonialism. Stolen people on stolen land. In entering a conversation about Sankofa, it is important to center the humanity of Black children and Black families, and to examine systems such as the education system which we work in that act upon them. This was written by Natalie Henry, president of the Ontario Black History Society. Again, welcome to our Sankofa panel discussion. I have joining us today a distinguished group of speakers from across UBC, past and current students, as well as individuals from middle and senior management. I generally don't like to introduce people because I like everyone to share their stories. I don't want to be the voice of anyone. And so I've asked the panelists if they would introduce themselves, and they have gracefully accepted my request to do so. I'm going to start with Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Damien, and I'm so happy to be here. My name is Stephanie Alchaprat. My background's from England, and I'm also Ghanaian. I'm from two tribal groups, the Equipim and the Fanta group. And so Sankofa is really something I heard routinely growing up. And so I'm really excited to be here today to speak. I recently completed my master's in the Interdisciplinary Graduate Studies program here at UBC Okanagan within the theme Power, Conflict, and Ideas. I also completed my undergrad degrees in English, microbiology, and gender women studies here as well. And my research, my master's in undergraduate research, looks at how Black Canadian women navigate medical obstetric racism. And so I'm deeply passionate about anti-Black racism in healthcare, and is something that I've been working on for a long time. I've also been one of the Black and student contributors on the Anti-Racism and Inclusive Excellence Task Force that was incredible, 54 incredible recommendations. And my current role and position as Black Initiatives Coordinator within the Southern Medical Program on this campus really kind of contributes to all that incredible work I've been doing already. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Stephanie. I will go to Trophy.
Hi everyone. I guess the best way in the theme is to describe my work is through a question that I put forward in an art exhibit that I was doing, which asks what was the name of Africa before the colonialists came. A lot of my work is using art as a tool to go back and find the so-called lost stories or lost culture. But now my work focuses on community building as well, using art as a tool. Founded the Africa Ubuntu Association, governed by the philosophy of Ubuntu, meaning I am because you are. So Bantu community practices, bringing them to the forefront and carrying them as community art practice. We also founded Kinfolk Nation, an artist collective that uses art in an interdisciplinary, intercultural way, creating space making for, again, community connection, community building. So yeah, a lot of my work is focused around that, and art really being the metaphor for culture. My background is in economics, but the link in a sense that's happening for me is culture as economy. And within that, that's what I'm exploring that with community, and having the privilege of exploring this work with many of the indigenous communities around BC. So that has been a beautiful opportunity and privilege.
Thanks, Trophy. I will go to Roheen.
Thank you so much, Damien. Maskati, everyone. This word means good afternoon in my mother tongue, Shona, which, as an uninvited guest and immigrant from Zimbabwe, I am finding that my Shona is slipping away more and more each day. And I'll talk a lot about the slipping away in some of the responses that I can give today. I have studied and lived in China, Finland, and Canada, and dedicated over 20 years working in higher education. My current role is the Associate Director of Strategic IPOC Initiatives at the University of British Columbia on the Vancouver campus. And part of my role is to embed EDI, anti-racism and decolonization lenses into policies, programs, and processes that support the student experience. But like many women of color, and certainly many Black women, I am a multi-hyphenate. I am a doctoral student, a leadership coach, a podcast host, a community contributor, a sister, a daughter, and a mother. And I'm truly honored to share this space with you all during Black History Month, a month that I truly believe is a month of joy, and look forward to the meaningful conversations that we will have together. Thank you.
Thanks, Roheen. IK?
Hello. My name is Ikechukwu Ibebugo, but I go by IK, so just the two letters, IK. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm project manager in the Equity and Inclusion Office, where I work to support projects that promote anti-racism, fairness, and inclusion across the UBC community. My role so far in the past year and a half has allowed me to collaborate on projects that create equitable environments where diverse voices are not just heard, but also valued. On the side, on my spare time, I co-founded a tech startup designed to make recruitment more efficient and more inclusive by leveraging AI. As an immigrant from Nigeria who came to Canada in 2018, I understand the importance of systems that uplift and empower individuals. And with that, I am passionate about creating spaces where people can thrive. And I bring this perspective to my work, whether it's driving organizational change or developing innovative technology to support inclusion. So I'm really happy for February, and I'm honored to be part of this panel today. this conversation to reflect on how we can draw from the wisdom of the past and shape a better future and a more inclusive future.
Thanks, IK. Ainsley.
First, let me say, Damien, thank you for your efforts to bring this conversation together. It is no small task to bring a group of people together to express interest in moving a community forward. So let me express my thanks and gratitude to you for making this happen. I'd also like to thank the guests that I have the privilege of being with today. Some of you I have met before, many of you I have not. So I thank you for allowing me to be part of this experience. I'm humbled by this opportunity. So thank you very much for this conversation. My name is Ainsley Carey, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice President for Students here at the University of British Columbia. Prior to UBC, I was the Vice President for Students at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, and prior to that, I held the same position at Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. As you can perhaps tell from my accent, I came from south of the Canadian border prior to joining the University of British Columbia. My parents are from the West Indies, from Trinidad and Tobago, and their parents were from West Africa. And my family immigrated to the United States. My mom and dad immigrated to the United States and landed in New York. I am number 3 out of 4 boys. And when my parents separated, we grew up in South Florida, Miami, Florida. So it's an honor for me to have this opportunity to live and play on this Musqueam territory. And I'm constantly reminded of the obligations as an uninvited settler on this space. I'm looking forward to today's conversation because I think this concept is a meaningful concept that can guide our lives and help us support each other as part of a community. So Damien, thank you for joining. Thank you for having me join you today.
Thank you so much. And so thank you again to all the panelists, and thank you to everyone that's joining us online. And so for today, we're going to go through a few questions. And basically, the objective of today is to breathe light into the concept of Sankofa. I know persons might be seeing it on the Okanagan campus because that's the theme for this year, and we're wondering what that is. And as I said before, it is from the Akan Tribe. It's a Twi word from the Akan Tribe in Ghana, and it means to go back and fetch what you left behind. And for many of us that live today as Black persons, we struggle with where we identify our roots. And this is an opportunity or a concept that we can use to link where we come from and where we want to go. So I am happy to have the panelists come today to share their experience with Sankofa, share their journeys along the way and how they have arrived here today by looking back at history and how history has shaped not just their lives, but all of our lives as Black people, and how we continue to push through whatever barriers there before us, and not just push through, because a part of the concept of Sankofa is lift as you rise. And so as we push through the barriers, we create open spaces so those behind us can come through. And so as I ask these questions, based on time, all the panelists might not answer all the questions. And so I just want to make sure everybody online knows that, just in case you think I'm jumping over somebody or missing somebody, but we play it by ear based on time. So the first question I would like to ask is, what does Sankofa mean to you? And how would you define it in the context of both personal and collective growth? I'm going to start with Trophy.
My journey to understanding Sankofa was, it happened in a strange, I think I was in Windsor and we're talking with an artist who I think was born in Detroit. He was doing film and photography in the 90s. And he kept looking at me and saying, oh, Sankofa, Sankofa, Sankofa. So I just kept wondering why he kept saying that. That introduced me to the work of the filmmaker Haile Gerima, who did the famous film. But the journey brought me back to when I lived in Ghana. For about some time, I had lived in Ghana. I'm actually from Uganda, but had the privilege of living in Ghana. And then I remembered the symbols. And what that meant to me was, just the reminder that there's knowledge that we had. And, they always think that the only writing before was hieroglyphs of Egypt, and which existed, but many other cultures had their forms of writing. But that's just that symbol. So as I kept studying the symbol, that stood out for me. And in doing so also, it happened in this call again to ask the question of where do our stories come from? And so you look at the bird and it's speaking, looking back. That led us also, there was an art exhibit in the Vancouver Museum for Anthropology that was titled Sankofa. And that journey kept going on. But what that shows to me is that there's a lot in the simple things of our heritage that we take for granted, but also that it's layered, and there are so many layers that we have to peel back out of to really understand who we are. And for me, what it reminds me of is the seed, right? The seed holds a lot of memory and story. And so it plants it down into the ground, and then when the right environment is, it remembers how to become what it's supposed to be.
To
So
flourish.
yes, so it's never lost. That we do not lose the stories or the culture, it lives and just emanates in this time. It's that when the necessary nutrients knock on those memories, they will come back, and the roots also come out of the seed, so does the shoot and the branches and leaves as well. So in the feeling of being lost is, what are those nutrients that knock the seed and remind it and how to come back and be who the seed is. But also that helps me to remember that I'm the one of today and now. And so how I express has to be true and authentic to the times now, to the ground that's around me, and to the environment that I live in. And to do that authentically, and in a way of gratitude to those who allowed this seed come and exist, and the seeds of the future that are children, the children that we're looking at now. So that's why it's a very important thing to me. And also the navigation of time is that we have, that knowledge in us. And if you keep paying attention and going deeper to understand who we are and to love yourself for who you just authentically are, then the new wisdoms begin to emanate on how to navigate the uncertainty of the future. Yeah.
Absolutely true, for the authenticity of being unapologetically Black. And to do so is really connecting with your heritage and finding out where you're coming from so you can stand tall, because this society really wants us to stay in a corner and not shine. But regardless of where we are on this continent, we continue to do so. I'm going to go to IK.
Thanks, Damien, and thank you, Trophy, for sharing. I do love your artistic approach to explaining Sankofa. Like, it just shows that you're a true artist. I never thought of that perspective before, so thank you for sharing. Personally, for me, full disclosure, I've never heard of the word Sankofa before until I got the email from Alicia and Damien to set up this awesome conversation. But after that, I did a bit of reading and found that this principle is actually something that I've lived by since being a young adult and being responsible for my choices, but not just with that label of Sankofa. As an immigrant to Canada from Nigeria, Sankofa does resonate with me deeply because it symbolizes, that balance between valuing my roots as a resource that I can learn from and carry forward with pride, and while also being open and embracing new opportunities and new perspectives. Since moving here in 2018, I've experienced a significant role that tradition and identity play in building a future. So personally, Sankofa for me is about going back to the lessons of my upbringing in Nigeria, the values of resilience, of community support, and being able to adapt. And these have shaped my growth in Canada as a professional, as a husband, and as a father. But it doesn't end there. Really, it's being open to continuous learning. Growing up, my parents always taught I and my siblings to learn by doing, and that it was okay to make mistakes because today's mistakes are tomorrow's lessons. Today's mistakes are lessons for tomorrow's growth. But in the same breath, they would tell us that we can't possibly make all the mistakes in the world in one lifetime. While it was okay to make mistakes and learn from them, it was equally important to learn from the mistakes of others. And that is what Sankofa means to me. Learning from the past, learning from your past mistake, and it doesn't always have to be your past. You can also learn from the past of others. Now, as a collective, Sankofa is not just personal to me; it's communal. Like you said, Damien, at the beginning, it encourages us to live as we climb. There's this popular saying in Nigeria, "We rise by lifting others." Is a common slang that someone would say when they help you out with something, just to kind of tease you. But it is real. It is Sankofa because it's making sure that the next generation, and not just in the next generation, even your peers, benefit from the lessons and knowledge and experiences that you've accumulated rather. My work in the equity office reflects this philosophy. In advocating for anti-racism and inclusion, we're not just simply pushing for new initiatives. We're learning from the past. We're leveraging historical work that has been done and holding ourselves accountable to drive sustainable change. And this is very evident in the STEER framework. It's not a new tool. It's pulling from the existing plans that has been in place over the years. One key aspect of this for me as well is mentorship. Being open to learning from others while passing on knowledge yourself is how I define mentorship. And personally, I have benefited from mentors who have shared their wisdom, and I aim to give back by mentoring others. Sankofa ultimately teaches that we grow stronger when we share knowledge and lift others. So just to sum it all up, my personal journey with Sankofa involves reconciling my Nigerian heritage with my Canadian experiences and recognizing that both of them contribute to who I am today.
Thanks, IK. I like your honesty. You say you did not know the word, but the concept is already embedded in you. And so I encourage other persons who look like us to connect the dots so you can realize if you're living, breathing Sankofa. You might not know the word because you were dispersed from a part of the origin, so you don't connect to the word, but you're living and breathing Sankofa. Ainsley, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, quickly, I appreciate Trophy and IK's description because it every time you hear it, it helps you feel and more confident about your understanding in it. I will admit also, like IK, I was familiar with the term, but I never reflected on it until asked to do so as part of this exercise. To me, Sankofa is part of a mindset, right? So even if you are not aware of the term and aware of the definition, you do have a mindset that reminds you that people came before you, had challenges before you, and there are opportunities to learn from their challenges and use those opportunities to push you and propel you forward. To me, Sankofa is a spirit. It's kind of a way of being. It's a way of being mindful is the thing that I like to think most of. My scholarship is in race, education, and the law. And I like to examine old legal cases to understand those who came before me, what they struggled with, because it helps me understand when things are going on right now, this stuff isn't new. So what we're seeing in American politics, Canadian politics, what's going on around the world, we've been here before. Our ancestors have traveled this path before. So there are lessons that they have left us on how to cope and how to deal right now. So it's incumbent upon us to remember those lessons, seek out those lessons to figure out how to move forward. I'm reminded of so many artists right now who have songs that remind us everything's going to be all right. Like this too shall pass. So there are strategies for moving forward. And that's rooted in Sankofa. That's rooted in understanding the spirit that we come from trailblazers and pioneers who have survived. And now it's incumbent upon us to use those lessons to move forward. So for me, Sankofa is all about understanding that our people have been here before. So we're going to be all right.
And I just want to repeat what Ainsley just said. We're in this geopolitical climate that just looks like we are not going to get across the silver lining or the perfect end. But as Ainsley said, this too shall pass. Just quick thoughts on this, Stephanie, before I wrap up this question.
Yeah, so Sankofa, like I mentioned before, is something that I grew up with. I understand the dialect equip him. So we also say Konokofa, so go and get it. It's mostly very you need to pick that up right now. So it kind of reminds me of somebody like an elder or somebody who has knowledge or is a knowledge keeper reminding you to go get something that you overlooked. And for me, in 2017, I got the amazing opportunity to travel back to Ghana because I left when I was very, very young. And I went to the slave castles, almost all of them in Ghana, and to be able to be there on the land to really understand it from my people's point of view, and then to do this research now, which looks back on the effects of enslavement on the current practices of medical racism in the Canadian and American context. That was a full circle moment. I needed that concept to really ground me in the work that I do. And this past Monday and Tuesday, me and a current medical student, we provided that anti-racism in healthcare framework using this very concept. So I was really kind of like ruminating on this concept throughout. And I think, oddly enough, as an adult, I learned the very thing that I probably known my whole entire life, but it really took me being in that space, being on in these unfortunate slave castles to really kind of be grounded in that knowledge of ancestors and of history that have really shaped common discourses around anti-Black racism in healthcare, most specifically. So I'm just going to say a brief moment about that.
Thanks, Stephanie. So my next question, for many years, someone else has been telling our stories from the colonial perspective. In what ways can Sankofa challenge or reshape our understanding of history, particularly in relation to the African diasporic community? Roheen?
Absolutely, Damien. It's just an easy question to respond to, isn't it? And thank you so much for my fellow panelists for grounding us in where is always, I think, a great place to start, which is a definition and a connection to spirit and the soul. When I think of Sankofa, I think Sankofa challenges the Western approach to seeing history as a linear progression. I think many of us, when we think of taking history classes, I know this was my experience in undergraduate days, we would often see history as these time capsules, you know, World War I between this period, World War II between this period. And often when history is taught from the perspective of this linear progression and from the lens of dominance and power, the story is distorted. It's incomplete and it's dismissive of the contributions of the of Africans, both those Africans who are on the continent, and many of us who have then entered a new set of communities across the world in the diaspora. And Trophy very much was speaking to this earlier when it comes to art as a form of public discourse. So for me, what I think of is that Sankofa presents history as more of a circular living dialogue between past and present. And when I see that, two things strike me as crucial. The first is it validates many of the things that I think some of us, and hopefully many of us, will start to see in the value of oral histories. For me, I grew up, as I mentioned, in Zimbabwe, and many times the oral histories and the cultural memory and the intergenerational wisdom was around fires, where aunts, uncles, grandparents would preserve our community stories despite systemic erasure. And it's that I get to pass on to my next generation and hopefully generations to come. Secondly, Sankofa empowers us to actively engage with history, not viewing it as a static and singular narrative. When I think of going back to fetch it, we're not just learning about the past, we're actually reclaiming narratives and recognizing our African community's intellectual, spiritual, cultural wells before colonial disruption, which means that for those of us who have had to leave either by force or by migration, we've actually shaped global history, science, art, political movements, and resistance strategies. And so this is the ancestral wisdom we carry in our bodies. I share this because I'm in my doctoral research journey, as I mentioned in the beginning, and I'm looking at leadership frameworks. And what I'm really interested and drawn to is how leadership has been framed in the global South, specifically looking at the matriarchs of communities and villages, which ultimately is the leadership that I think we need today. People like Mbuya Nahanda in Zimbabwe who fought against the colonizers. So when we bridge validation and we bridge empowerment, many of my panelists have already said we continue the lessons, we honor those who pave our way, but even more importantly, I think we don't start our story from a place of slavery or colonization. We extend our story to a time in which in Africa we had rich civilizations, we had critical philosophies and paradigms, we had cultural traditions that can inform our present. And perhaps if we reshape our narrative from that place and that starting point, we tap into an ancestral wisdom where we can see ourselves as much more powerful than the labels or the stereotypes that social constructs lead us to believe who we are as Black people and communities across the world.
Absolutely, Roheen. I like the part where you say reclaiming the narratives, because as I said earlier before, oftentimes our stories are written by somebody else, and we're told that this is who we are, and we sort of go down the path of believing that. And so we really need to reclaim who we are, because regardless of what they've said, Black history has been around long before slavery. And so we need to tap into that. And I'm going to say that again, Black history has been around long before slavery. Stephanie, your thoughts?
Yeah, thank you so much for your points, Raheen. I definitely feel like centering Black voice, not necessarily decentering our voices. And I also think that encouraging us to reclaim marginalized histories, placing our kind of knowledge in leadership kind of like frameworks. I think I remember growing up really kind of being put or cast type into kind of one central trope or story. And it took me a long time through critical race theory, through understanding intersectionality, through understanding the African diaspora, to really kind of reframe how I position myself. And I think that research is one of those lenses. Qualitative research, I think for me in this master's and undergrad was a great opportunity to reflect back on community. I think I can't speak for everyone, but I think in BC specifically, I've felt isolated as a Black individual, and being able to shed light on voices and perspectives of women that are considered to be my sisters, my aunties, friends, to be able to center their voices and creating effective change was this kind of like the aha moment, that Sankofa moment. And I think that history definitely provides context. And as was mentioned with Raheen, I think the history that we know of predominantly is that enslavement history. And I think reshaping that to understand what past injustices have done reshapes that one single trope, that one tokenized voice. And I feel like in the research that I've done, I've been able to create effective change by centralizing community voices. And I never thought I'd able to do that. So kind of breaking new ground in understanding and reshaping how history shapes present discourses. And I think that the African diaspora is so broad and so big and so expansive. And as Raheem was mentioning, with migrant versus immigrant versus Black Canadian, I think for me, learning my positionality as a Black British woman, a Black Canadian woman, a Black African woman was something that I'm still negotiating, and that doesn't need to be preset or defined by any institutional powers. And so understanding through research and through giving voice and perspective to those in community is a way to kind of challenge that dominant kind of rhetoric or single voice or single story that I think is prominent in mainstream culture.
Absolutely. And yes, the isolation you can feel in this country is absolutely real. For me, my biggest cheerleaders have been my grandmothers. And so when I get in that space, those are the voices I center and remind myself, regardless of what is said, I can do this. So yes. Throfi, any thoughts on this briefly?
Yeah, I really agree with what most everybody is talking about. And just to add, also in the context of shaping history, is that our present condition is future history. So it's not just the one, it's the one to come. And to understand and value the present time and value of that as well in that journey. So that's why Sankofa is an important, element for me as a person. But also how you see, does that symbol alone collectively has held something so deep that it allows for a moment like this of deeper community reflection of many diasporic voices, and how this is also playing a role in shaping the future history as well. So yeah, that's
Thanks, Trophy. My next question. Sankofa emphasizes the importance of looking back to move forward. How do you see this approach in the context, and we have been talking about this a lot so far, in the context of community building and healing from past trauma? Ainsley?
Again, thanks for this question and thanks for this conversation. I've been reflecting on this particular question quite a bit. And one of the sounds that kept coming to me was these words: in this great future, you can't forget your past. So dry your eyes, I say. Those of you who listen to Bob Marley know where that's coming from, right? So there's so much of our culture and music and art and entertainment that's embedded with this work of Sankofa, but it's also embedded with the concepts of recovery and healing, remembering your past as a tool to deal with trauma. So don't cry. Like, this is not over yet. This too shall pass. I am constantly reminded. And if you listen to Bob Marley's song, No Woman, No Cry, it is about, I remember when we used to sit in the government town in Trenchtown, right? I remember, he's talking about the past. And then he says, in this great future, like what we're dealing with, we can't forget our past. So dry your eyes, I say, right? So it's all about remembering the past, talking about the present and the future, and saying it's going to be all right. And those of you who are also involved in hip hop will understand Kendrick Lamar also says, it's going to be all right. Like, we going to be all right. So part of me, my concept of dealing with trauma is this reminder of, there's time to mourn, but then there's also time to get ready to prepare for the future. I enjoy the concept of Sankofa and thinking about the trailblazers before us, because not only were they activists prepared to stand forward and march and share their voices, they were strategic thinkers. If you ever watch the film, the Martin Luther King movie, there's a group that is out there protesting and marching, but at night they were sitting down and planning. They were strategic thinkers. So we get the illusion that it's all about protest. That's the only way to make change happen. But it's also about being strategic. It's also about being mindful. So in addition to the people standing in front of the White House or other government buildings chanting, holding up sign, that is important, that is needed. But also equally important are those who are strategically planning for the next move, because nothing can change without the strategy. And when I study the intersection of race, history, and education and the law, those who made changes required activism, but they also required strategic thinkers. So for me, building community and trauma is already seeped into our art, culture, and music, and it gives us messages of encouragement for the future. But we need activism and strategic thinking.
Absolutely. And as Ainsley just mentioned, several different genres that Black people have influenced and created. And for those who have not seen the Grammys, Queen Beyonce just went and reclaimed country music. So you can check that out afterwards. Stephanie, thoughts?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Ainsley. I think community building is central. I think that that can look in so many different ways. I think for me, research was a great vessel to really channel past trauma within community to create changes. So that could look like policies, that could create initiatives, that could be so many different things. And I think for me, learning from what in my background of understanding how obstetric racism impacts Black maternal life is to now occupy spaces, talk about, have open discussion about it, and reshape how we define past traumas and lead the discussions and kind of center Black voices and Black lives in it rather than being an objective thing over there. We're engaging community in fruitful discussion that will eventually create change. I think change often seems something far off, distant, that we have to do once we have everything together, we have all these plans. But I think in this role that I have on campus as the Black Initiatives Coordinator, being able to occupy space and work with medical learners and teach them about anti-Black racism, have open discussion and dialogue about things that they're already learning is Sankofa is creating a space so that we can discuss past trauma. You don't necessarily need to look like me, but to be able to understand from community and from past kind of oppression to really be the change makers, because I think it's not just community but the individual, and to be able to channel what community past traumas have unfortunately happened to create individual changes in interactions for the future learners. I think I'm always going to refer to medicine because that's something that's part of my research, but I think that that can translate to so many different areas. And trauma doesn't have to fester and kind of develop over time in a way that is unnerving and in a way in society unproductive. We can channel that so that whomever is going through something can have their voices heard, and those people who are in have some sort of leadership are able to create those changes. And I think that that's why I'm really lucky to be able to do research like this and to understand that and to apply that. But I think whoever's watching can also apply that for themselves in understanding that past traumas, especially amongst Black communities, doesn't have to be just within community. It can be something we can share in order to, it's in a culturally safe space in order to create that change that we want to see. So that's one example that I can think of.
Briefly, IK, any thoughts on that?
Just to add and to also echo what everyone has said, um, um, it's gonna pass. This is something I'm living in currently. 9 months ago, my partner were blessed with twin girls, and so we're going through that stages of development at this time. And this week, we've entered the sleep regression phase. And now the memory that I'm going back to now is last week when I used to get better sleep. And knowing that it's going to pass. So like, with Sankofa, having that mindset builds that resilience in you to keep pushing forward. And just acknowledging that healing is not a straight path, right? It's going to be ups and downs, it's going to be setbacks. And it doesn't happen overnight, but always try to consistently reflect to what happened in the past, what your experiences are, where, and how to adjust moving forward.
My next question, reflecting on Sankofa, what are the implications for the work you do? I'm going to start with Roheen.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And IK, we are wishing you all the best. May the sleep regression ease and end soon. Some of us have been there, so I'm sending you lots of thoughts your way. Thank you so much, David, for this question, because I always appreciate that you're able to move us from conceptualization to application. And when I think of implications, I think of two specific areas. So one is the professional sphere, as I imagine that there are many people joining us who don't only work at UBC, but also work in other sectors. And what I would offer is, from a professional sphere perspective, is that Sankofa, no doubt, by this moment in the panel, you've heard the power that it holds in calling us to critically examine our practices, whether it's at our institution or at organizations. And so I always offer a deepening of questions. And perhaps these are some questions that you can take in your practices. The question of, are we truly learning from our past mistakes? And how are we actually measuring and evaluating that? Are we meaningfully incorporating diverse knowledge systems and histories into our practices, our curriculum, our spaces? And on the topic of spaces, are we designing spaces where marginalized voices can be valued and heard? And so these questions offer, hopefully, a deepened sense of design and incorporating some of that strategy that Ainsley was speaking to. I've had the privilege of the professional sphere of being one of the lead designers for the UBC Black Student Space on the Vancouver campus. And there were many things that we celebrated as part of the launch. One of them is something that every time I go into the space, my heart skips a beat. And that is the addition of the library. There is a library in the section of the Black Student Space. And above the library is a quote that we intentionally created by Chinua Achebe, which says, "Until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter." And definitely Trophy has already spoken to this, and IK is the power of who tells our story. And the reason why we created that was we wanted to expand access to students in the space to be able to draw from African literature and research that centers the Black lived experience so that they can mobilize their knowledge and take it forward. And so Sankofa challenges us to move beyond superficial inclusion, and we've seen what that looks like as a checklist or a checkbox, to a much more deeper transformative change that honors both where we've come from and where we are going, that forward-looking moment that Trophy was speaking about. I said there were two. So the second one is the personal perspective. Each and every one of us has, I would say, two choices to make. The first choice is the power of expanding your own knowledge. And the second choice is, if you have knowledge, gift it to the world. So I offer two resources. For those who are interested in learning more and the implications and driving in terms of the implications of the work, please look to the incredible research and writing of Dr. Yvonne Gilpin-Jackson. And I'll put more about Dr. Yvonne's work in the chat. And then I also offer, for those who have a platform or have knowledge and are looking for a platform, bridge that and offer that as a gift to the world. I have an incredible colleague who is based out in Quebec, Michaela Mutoni Dovolo, and she just launched her first children's book. I don't think I can quite show it because then I will like bridge out of here. But this book is the journey of Isaro and Juru to Accra, Ghana. She just launched it earlier this year. And this is her way of gifting her Ghanaian and also Rwandan cultures. Each of us can use the talents and the gifts that we have to truly embody Sankofa and truly embody lifting as we climb. Those are the two areas that I believe have the major implications in how we can embed Sankofa in all of our work.
I think Rolene started on this question, and so I'm just going to throw it out again. What are some steps that those listening can take to apply and incorporate Sankofa into their lives and continue to build knowledge? Ainsley?
I'll use my path as a form of advice. One is mindfulness. I think keeping this kind of mindfulness spirit, that these are things that our ancestors have dealt with in the past. So there's a way out. There's a way that we can overcome. Thinking about the balance between activism and strategic planning. Everyone is not an activist and everyone is not a strategic planner, but there's a place for you in how to do that. I like this idea of recognizing the past as part of fuel for moving forward. But then the last thing that I'll recognize, sometimes we look at the past for the tragedies of the past, the things that were hard in the past. What we rarely seek from the past are the victories and the places that we have won, and pulling those forward to say, we can be victorious in this space. So I like the celebration of our trailblazers, our pioneers, our winners, those who have been victorious in good times and in bad times. So I say to those who want to find ways to embed this into their daily living, mindfulness, being aware that this too shall pass, and also using Sankofa as a tool for helping us be mindful of where we have been victorious.
Thank you. Stephanie?
Yeah, I'm kind of echoing what's been said, but celebrating, I think that's the biggest word for me. I think we don't celebrate each other enough. And celebrating African heritage, I think for me personally, it took me going back to the motherland to really kind of understand the history and legacy, in order for me to move forward in doing impactful research. And I think in celebrating, focusing on encouraging Black research, Black-led initiatives, cultural storytelling, and if you don't identify as Black necessarily, kind of making that room and space for Black voices to be heard, and centering those voices, and also driving and encouraging Black research. I think in recent years that's been something that has been happening, but I want it to continue to happen. I think that if I didn't necessarily get the opportunity to do research, I wouldn't have put the puzzle pieces together in my life and understood the bigger picture in order to make impactful change, which I hope will happen in policies, will happen in initiatives, will happen in more impactful workshops where you're talking to future leaders and current learners, things like that, that help us celebrate the diaspora and experience of being Black. It's not just within this Black History Month, it's 365 days of the year, continuous. And that's something to be celebrated year round. And I can only speak obviously about research, but I also think in, as Ainsley mentioned, in protest, it doesn't have to be protest where you're outside, but being Black, in my opinion, is a protest enough. You are occupying space, you are celebrating yourself, and that, unfortunately, is novel. It's kind of impactful, right? To celebrate oneself in sometimes in different spaces. So I think that building that kind of community and fostering changes through collective Black-led initiatives is so important. And I just wanted to add that.
Thanks. Ike, I'm going to let you give the last point on that.
Okay. Yeah, I had multiple thoughts, but the one major one for me, the major one for me is really building, like intentionally building these intergenerational bridges. Actually we seek opportunities to learn from mentors or even peers who have faced similar challenges to what you're going through right now. And at the same time, being intentional about sharing your knowledge with those that are going to come after you. Um, as everyone has echoed today, Sankofa really does teach that growth happens when knowledge flows both way. Personally, I've been lucky to have amazing mentors who have helped guide me, especially when I first came to Canada. They shared their experiences, they helped me avoid common mistakes, and most importantly, they helped me or reminded me that I was not alone, And now, as a project manager, an entrepreneur, and as a father, I try to pass this knowledge onto others. Again, Sankofa is lifting as we climb. This mentality really does help communities grow stronger. Yeah.
Thanks, IK. Where does the time go? I think we really could use another hour because there's just so much to unpack. Um, to my panelists, thank you, thank you, thank you. There is so much that you have shared, and I think the community out there is leaving fulfilled, replenished, and as we keep saying, this too shall pass. So I'm hoping that that's one of the things that they take from this panel. But I really want to say thank you to my panelists, and thank you to everyone that has joined us today. My panelists, your engagement, your reflection have made this conversation meaningful. As we wrap up, let's remember the wisdom of Sankofa. Look into our past to guide us towards a better future. And as my panelists keep saying, this too shall pass. The insights shared today are just the beginning, and I hope that you're inspired to continue to reflect with action in your own lives and communities. Thanks again to my incredible panelists. The dialogue, the lessons shared was impactful. I would also like to remember everyone that there are many, many Black History Month activities going across both campuses this month. And again, as Stephanie says, Black history is 365 days of the year. Continue to be unapologetically Black. We are having another event tomorrow where the College of Graduate Studies is putting on. That's the movie and games night, and that's 6:30 in UNC 335. So if you're here on the Okanagan campus, please come out and join us. Again, to my panelists, thank you. So the participants that I'm not seeing your face, thank you so much for being a part of this. I can see a few comments there. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time to engage where we could bring our participant in to have conversation with panelists so we can dig deep and sort of build community. But as you go forward, I say, build community among each other. This too shall pass, but without community, it won't happen. We can do this, but we have to do this together. Once again, thank you all and have a good day.